About the same as last time? Chad, do you guys have any thoughts on the exam? How was the exam? Good morning. So one big part of my weekend was grading the exams, which I successfully did. Ellie said it was good. All right. So if you couldn't hear, Sydney said it was about the same as last time. The scores were about the same as last time. Actually, I hate to say it, I think they were a little bit lower this time. And I don't know what that reflects, but we can go into the details of that at the end of class. It was like the first midterm. Yeah, that's what I was going for, is give you kind of nothing new, nothing unexpected. Obviously different material. And one thing to note is we are done with exams. So, for example, if you were reading this Pure Land Buddhism reading and wondering what terms you're going to need to memorize for the next exam, I will now remind you that you don't have to memorize anything because there are no more exams. So now we kind of enter a new phase of the class where we get ready to write a paper. I'll take this book out, Novice to Master, an ongoing lesson in the extent of my own stupidity. It's very short, very easy to read, you know, big print, actually not even that many pages, but it's kind of poetic. There's a lot going on in this little book. Good morning, Brennan. So I encourage you to buy it. I've been encouraging you to buy it for a long time now. I guess I'll throw it in the chat in case anybody did not get the initial memo about that. Where's the publication information? Here it is. So a lot of you probably already have this because, again, I've been telling you to get this from day one, but now we're actually going to read it. So again, this is where we're at. Today's the 19th. We're going to do a little article on Pure Land Buddhism today, and then we'll do Morinaga for the rest of the semester. So we'll start reading this next time, and then we'll read this till the very end. And then finally, we'll have a final paper that will be due in a little less than a month. Classes finish just 2 weeks from Thursday, so like 2.5 weeks, which is really weird. It feels like this has been the never-ending semester, but now it is actually almost ending. So here we are. So anyways, hopefully the exam wasn't too painful. We'll go over it at the end of class. You can find your grade on Moodle if you were curious, and I'll give you the full report in a little while. And again, Morinaga, we'll start this next time. So get ready. Any questions about stuff? There's also extra credit due before midnight on Thursday. So I guess we could look at that too. Extra credit. This we've talked about before. Actually, you know what? I think I have a slide about this. So I wanted to remind you. Yeah, extra credit. So I encouraged you to watch Nang Nak. Again, it would have been good before the exam. As you probably saw, there's at least one question about Nang Nak. She wasn't actually too big on the exam, just because we only went over her for the one class. But yeah, if you want to watch the movie, it's a good movie. It is a horror movie. I even made a little warning for you guys. It's a horror film, so there's violence and gore and stuff. It's not egregious, but it's there. And if you don't like that kind of stuff, we could come up with another movie for you if you want to write about something else. If you want to do extra credit, but you don't want to do a horror film, we could figure that out too. It's on, yeah, bless you. It's on Netflix. It's on YouTube. There's a little assignment. Here's a link to the assignment, and it's due later this week. So if you absolutely cannot do it by in 3 days and 16 hours, kind of like how it does that. If you can't do it this week, let me know. But the reason it's due this week is because it's more tied to what we have already finished. Right now, we're kind of doing new stuff. So I want to put the past behind us and embrace the future. So anyways, this is your extra credit assignment. So one thing you can now decide is, is this worth my while, right? So if you didn't know this, I can tell you, you can calculate your grade, right? So each of the grades on Moodle don't represent your final grade because they're weighted differently, right? On Moodle, it weights everything the same. So you have to do a little magic But for example, the reading responses are each 7.5. The exams are 40% total, 20% each. So between these, you know half of your grade, right? And so you can decide based on this knowledge whether you want to do the extra credit or not. The final paper is big, as you can see, 30%. And participation is something I will decide based on whether or not I know who you are. Because some of you, I hate to say, I have no idea who you are because I've never heard your voice and never seen your face. So, anyways, final paper. That's the big piece that's missing. If you're thinking, oh no, I've done badly on these two exams and there's nothing I can do, that's false, right? Because you can do the extra credit and you can do the final paper. There's a lot yet to be decided, but now is the time to really wake up and make things happen. Because if you don't, then you will, seal your own fate. So, anyways, that's what's left. Any questions about stuff? Okay, again, here we are, 19th, just a few more weeks. All right, so this is our ketchup and mustard map that we've seen a few times now. As you can see, I've scrolled it to the right a little bit because we're not focusing on Central Asia as much as we were a little while ago. Now we will actually really focus on Japan quite a bit. This book, Novice to Master, maybe you can tell from the author's name, Soka Morinaga, Japanese author. So this is about Zen Buddhism. You guys heard of Zen Buddhism before? Zen has become a very English word, right? What does Zen mean in English? I feel like there's a Spotify ad I don't know, I don't think they play it anymore, but I feel like a year or two ago, it was like, if you're going for like a Zen night, put on this playlist. So like, what are you advertising to me right now? Jonathan? And so yeah, very good. And in Japanese, that's what Zen really means, is meditation. But yeah, in English, it has a bit more of like a balanced, focused sort of. I don't know. Again, it sort of takes on its own meaning in a way. But maybe you remember. You probably don't remember, but there's the term we learned is jhana or dhyana. Those are those levels of calming meditation, the trance meditation. You can go up kind of different levels of trance meditation. That is what Zen translates. It's jhana. And so the Chinese word is Chan. So I don't mean to say it's like a uniquely Japanese tradition. It's shared by the rest of Asia too. But it kind of became, let's say, more popular, and it sort of became its own thing in Japan. So again, that's what this book is all about. We're going to cover that next time, though. Today, we'll kind of get ready and look at a few other Buddhist traditions in East Asia, right, in this part of the world. And so as you can tell from our ketchup and mustard map, this is all part of the Mahayana. Maybe you guys remember from the exam, I made you do some stuff about the Mahayana, didn't I? Yeah. So this is more Mahayana. And what we're mostly talking about today is Pure Land. As I was walking to class, I was thinking about what's the best way to do this. And I might sort of switch it up. So if you're following along in the slides, I'm going to jump around a little bit. I thought maybe, why don't we just start with Japan? Because again, that's sort of where we're going to end up. And we can reach back to China. Actually, this whole reading is by Chinese authors. But again, this is a tradition that becomes kind of more popular in Japan. So let's start with Japan, then we can kind of reach back to China. I think this will make the most sense. So a little bit of history. Buddhism first comes to Japan. We could say relatively late, relative to, for example, China or India, right? When did the Buddha live? Do you guys remember when the Buddha lived? Say again? Forever? Well, that's true. Let's say, when did Shakyamuni Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, when did he live? When was the prince living? Didn't I give you like rough dates that are good to remember? Before or after Christ? Before Christ, by how many hundreds of years? Not quite 1,000. Not quite 800. 500. Yeah, it's a very round number. It is 500. That's right. It's very easy to remember, right? 500 BC. Pretty easy. Then you get Christ. Then about 500 years later, who do you get? Another important major founder of religious tradition whose followers are currently fasting because it is a holiday. Muhammad. Yeah, it's Ramadan. You guys aware it's Ramadan? I went to get a sandwich at the deli, and the dude who works there, who's usually really nice, was like in a heap on the counter. And I was like, "Hey, how's it going?" And then he kind of shot up. He's like, "Oh, how's it going?" I was like, "How are you? How are you doing, my friend?" And he said, "Oh, it's the first day of Ramadan." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I was very sheepishly buying lunch from him as he was starving and totally lacking energy. So, anyways, this is a good way to think about the world, right? Buddhism, 500 years, Christianity, 500 years, Islam. So again, when we think about Buddhism coming to Japan, relatively late, right? 700, CE, 700 of the Common Era, AD, Anno Domini, right? So 700 years after Christ. So that means Buddhism had been kind of growing and developing for over 1,000 years by this point. And the history of Buddhism in Japan is pretty complicated. Lots of different stuff happens. We're not going to go into any detail on that, but interesting, right? When it first comes, it's a time of big empires. The Chinese Empire is really big. In Korea, there are big empires. And in Japan, the government is very centralized. And again, there's this sense of Buddhism becoming an imperial religion. So what do you think Buddhists, maybe I can turn this into a question. What would Buddhists offer an empire? Why would an empire want to sponsor Buddhism? Based on what we've learned so far. I don't know if you'll even be able to answer this question, but I'm kind of curious to see what you think. Why would an empire want Buddhists? What could they offer? I like that. Why do you say education? Okay. I like that. So what Brendan's saying, if you guys can hear him, he said education. Oh, we got people in the waiting room because they didn't come on time. All right. Sorry to keep you all waiting. Welcome, waiting room people. Yeah, so Brendan was saying education. So that's great, right? One thing that develops with Buddhism, and I don't think people give them enough credit, if they are this first kind of major tradition built around a charismatic religious figure, and I shouldn't even say that, they are not the first one, but if they are kind of the first in the series that we just talked about, one thing that develops along with them is monasticism. The Buddhists really did develop monasticism. That is a major contribution to world society. And with monasticism, like Brendan was saying, comes education, right? Because if you're a monk, what else are you going to be doing other than learning stuff, right? Monks and nuns. And with that comes monasteries. And at the monastery, the main activity, again, is education. And frankly, what is the monastery, or what is a descendant of the monastery, is what we are doing right now, right? We are the monks and nuns of the common era of the contemporary world, right? We are here to learn things. We're not here to make things. We're not here to grow crops or do any, like, obviously functional things for society. We're here to learn, right? To grow, to develop. And you can draw a line really straight back to the monasteries of the old world. Again, Christianity also has a monastic system. Islam also has something kind of like a monastic system, although not exactly the same, where you have these educational centers, right? Founded around this religion. So that's a great suggestion. So I totally agree with Brendan. That's one thing that the Buddhists could offer the Japanese Empire, is this kind of formalized education system, and it really does take off when the monks start coming around the year 700, a little bit before. Education comes with them. And then I wrote up here state rituals too. So if the government wants to protect their empire, then the monks can come in and say, hey, we'll put in a good word with whatever deities, we'll get Guanyin on our side, right? We'll get all the other gods and other deities on our side. So there are sort of ritual aspects to this as well. And these are basically the two main functions of monks now, not just in Japan, but basically everywhere, is there are scholastic monks who read and write books, and then there are monks who do more ritual kind of stuff and maybe are not even literate. That's another kind of monk. And there are other kinds of monks too, but these are the two main categories. And so, yeah, this develops. A lot happens in Japan over these 500 years that I have written here. The government kind of, after a few hundred years, kind of dissolves a little bit. You get all like the samurai and the shogun. You guys heard of samurai before? Right? And so there's a bit more kind of a civil war thing happening. And it's not exactly the right way to put it, but let's just say a less centralized form of government. And so Buddhism transforms along with it. And yeah, a lot of these teachings are coming from Korea and China. A lot of people talk about China as being kind of the main source of Japanese Buddhism, but Korea was actually more important. And as you can see here, that makes sense, right? Just geographically speaking, the trip from Korea to Japan is rather short, but even that was kind of perilous. There are these stories of monks who were trying to sail from China to Japan, and they just kept failing over and over again. Like they would leave from here, for example, and they'd get like this far, and then a storm would come and they'd like wash up on the southern shores of China or something. There's one monk in particular, what's his name, Jianzhen. He was this very famous monk who kind of brought Buddhism to Japan, so to speak, in terms of like this formal educational kind of Buddhism we were just talking about. So anyways, it was a bit of a difficult trip, even though it looks simple by today's standards. Kind of crossing the sea here was a bit perilous. So anyways, where were we? We were here. As Buddhism comes to Japan, again, it sort of transforms in the process. It begins as this sort of state scholarly tradition, but then these more popular practices develop too. And so that's what we're actually going to start focusing on is Pure Land, there's Nichiren, and then Zen is probably the most, the most elite of the three of these. We can use that word. In the sense that it sort of presents itself as being the hardest one, right? This book is, it's a little bit, almost like macho. It's a little macho where you have to kind of put forth great effort in order to achieve great results, which is in line with a lot of the things we've studied so far, right? The story of Milarepa, for example, that's also kind of macho. But Pure Land is not. Pure Land it presents itself as the easy path. So we'll mainly discuss that today. But before we get to that, let's do Nichiren, because I think this will actually help us understand Pure Land a little better too. So I'll keep lecturing for a little bit, and then we can do the Pure Land. So again, I mentioned that things were sort of transforming as society transformed in Japan. Nichiren shows up. He's very, very famous. He's very important for Japanese Buddhism. And he is part of a tradition called Soka Gakkai. You guys probably haven't heard of this, have you? Soka Gakkai? Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Does anybody know about that? I've heard, I haven't watched it, but the Tina Turner documentary, have you guys watched that? She became Buddhist later in life, and this is the tradition that she follows. Actually, when I moved into New York, I hired some movers because I didn't know anybody here, and as they were like helping me carry my books, as you can probably imagine, I have tons and tons of books, and some of them are, I don't have any Japanese books, but I have Chinese characters, books in Chinese characters, and one of the movers saw it, and he was like, "Oh, what are these books?" I was like, I study Buddhism and stuff. He's like, "Oh, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo." I was like, "Yes, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo." So it's a very popular tradition now. This Soka Gakkai tradition, it's based on the teachings of Nichiren. So as you can see, it goes back many hundreds of years, but it's still probably the most active missionary Buddhist tradition, in the sense that people are going out and trying to spread these teachings. And we'll see why, because it makes big promises for a pretty simple practice. But going back to Nichiren, he was a monk who developed his own school. He was one of these kind of scholastic guys. But around this time, like I said, there was a little bit of a period of, let's say, unrest one thing you can think about is the 13th century, something very important is happening. I'm giving you a lot of historical markers, but this is big for the entire world. Maybe you guys already know this, but what was happening in the 13th century across the entire world in terms of politics and empires and that sort of stuff? What's the big empire, the big new player in the 13th century? The largest contiguous empire in world history. It's not contiguous. That's right. You guys know what contiguous means? It means it's all next to each other. Ottoman was big, but they basically are following the footsteps of this empire that, again, doesn't get the credit it is due. 13th century. I think there's a Netflix thing on Marco Polo. You guys watch that? What empire did Marco Polo visit? The
Roman Empire.
What did you say, Catherine?
The Roman Empire.
Oh, it's the Mongols.
Yeah.
Connor got it. It's the Mongols. Yeah. So Genghis Khan takes over the world around this time. And as you can imagine, I guess we could look at a map. They take over China. They take over. They basically take over all the way out to here. Kalmykia is a ethnically Mongol space. So they take over like this entire Eurasian swath to the point where they're sending messages to the Pope. And they're like, hey, Pope, you better send us tribute or we're going to take you out. All the way to Hungary, right, to the steppes of Europe. And then eventually the Khan dies. And so they say, all right, never mind Europe. We'll leave you alone for now. And they never come back. So it's sort of it's a bit of a flash in the pan. But when is this flash in the pan happening? Is during this time, the 13th century. It's a crazy time. This is when I do a lot of my research. So maybe you can tell this is a time where I'm like pretty locked in. But again, Mongol Empire is good to know, just in the sense of transforming the entire world. And then after this, again, you get Marco Polo. You get Christopher Columbus, who was reading Marco Polo, right? So these are related. There's a sense like, hey, something amazing is happening on the other side of the world. Let's sail around and try to figure it out. And that, leads to the discovery of the New World. And then there are these maritime empires and that sort of thing. So this, again, is sort of the climax of terrestrial empires, right? On land, contiguous empires. Because after this, it goes all sailing and it sort of sets up the world that we live in today. But if you're in Japan and you hear about this giant, crazy army developing on the mainland, that you're going to start to get a little nervous, right? It'd be like, if we're here in America and there's some, I don't know, it's like the Nazis are spreading all over Europe or whatever, like, oh no, this is going to start coming for us if we're not careful, right? So that's what was happening in Japan at this time. And in fact, the Mongols did try to take over Japan. They went into Korea. They forced the Koreans to build ships for them. And this whole thing, do you guys watch Game of Thrones? I feel like I've referenced Game of Thrones before. This whole thing about like the horse people trying to cross the ocean, right? That's a big sort of theme in the Game of Thrones. It's based on the Mongols, right? It's based on the same idea. It's that there's a little bit of a stereotype. The Mongols weren't good with ships. And the reason there is that stereotype is because they actually were not able to conquer Japan. They even, got their armies onto ships, but then something very special happened. A divine wind. Do you guys know the name of divine wind in Japanese? Kamikaze. You know what that means? Kamikaze? You guys familiar with this? World War II? No? Yeah. No, you're thinking the right thing. Yeah. So this same term that then gets applied to pilots in the World War II Japanese army who were flying planes into ships or whatever. The term derives from this period when the Mongols are trying to take over Japan, and these hurricanes or typhoons or whatever you want to call them sink all the ships, right? And so it happens more than once, in fact. There are these giant armies, Mongol armies, trying to go into Japan, and it's basically the weather that beats them. Nichiren is said to have predicted the coming of the Mongol invasion. So he's sort of being promoted as this prophet in a way. And, I can't confirm or deny that, but people kind of didn't initially believe him. The government saw him as a dangerous figure. He was banished. I found this sort of interesting picture here where here's Nichiren being banished on an island, and eventually he comes back. And then I think he gets banished again, and like there's this executioner who's preparing to chop off his head, and apparently the sword was struck by lightning. There are all these crazy things that kind of get built around Nichiren. But in the end, what he's remembered for is this Lotus Sutra. So we haven't actually talked too much about the Lotus Sutra. Nichiren would be sad if we had a Buddhism class and we didn't talk about the Lotus Sutra. So I'll just talk about it very briefly. There are many, many, many sutras in Buddhism, to the point where I didn't want to burden you with introducing so many sutras, but this is, let's say, top 5 sutras, very important sutra. And for Nichiren, it's the most important, right? Because there are all these different books, it's sort of confusing, it's overwhelming. It's like if we had a table full of books, like where do you even start? Nichiren would say, you don't need all those other books because we have the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra is the main book. It's such a good book. It's so blessed, right? It's basically like it's not just the recorded speech of the Buddha, it's like the direct speech of the Buddha. And just by saying the name of this sutra, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, you are evoking the blessings of the Buddha, right? And so he really kind of hypes it up to the point where rather than even reading the sutra, people just recite the name of the sutra. And that's why the guy who's helping me move my books said Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, because that is the main practice of this tradition, is to recite Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. And again, Tina Turner got into this too. I should watch her documentary. It just came out, so I haven't had a chance to see it yet. So that's the main thing. One thing I wanted to highlight as we were talking about Nichiren is there's this idea of a degenerate age that comes into play here. You know what degenerate means? I sort of define it here, but it looks like you're taking notes, so I'll keep it here for a second. What does degenerate mean? Do you guys know what degenerate means? Let's look it up. So having lost the physical, mental, moral qualities considered normal, desirable, showing evidence of decline, right? So degenerate age would be an age that shows evidence of decline. Are we living in a degenerate age right now? Does it feel like 2020 was a year of degeneration?
Yeah.
It does, right? So there's actually kind of an interesting connection here. For Buddhists, this is actually a very important idea, this idea of a degenerate age. Maybe you remember impermanence, right? So for Buddhists, they take this idea seriously. And not only are all sort of physical things and our bodies and everything impermanent, the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings are also impermanent, right? Of course they are. They have to be. Just because, I mean, everything's impermanent. And so they took this seriously. And when big bad things start happening, like Mongols are invading or COVID starts striking everything, and the world is going to hell, and there are mass shootings every week, for crying out loud, right? And horrible things are happening all around the world. Rather than blaming any sort of individual or president, although it's tempting to do that or whatever, blame some sort of specific thing, Buddhists would kind of kick it out to this general idea that it's now a degenerate age. It's the end of the Buddha's blessings, right? When the Buddha was here, things were great because he was so enlightened. And we talked about relics. Remember relics? You could go visit the relics and get the blessings, that sort of thing. But after a while, the blessings kind of wear off. And the further away we get from him, his teachings become more corrupted. And we enter this final Dharma age. In Japanese, it's called Mappo. In Chinese, it's called Morpha. We enter this final Dharma age where Buddhism's starting to kind of disappear. And what it used to be, it's really not anymore. And so what do we do about this? Well, one thing is we can just sort of blame stuff on this final degenerate age. I kind of like this part, which is one reason why I'm emphasizing it for you. We don't have to, blame individuals or blame ourselves. If you need to blame something, just blame 2020, right? as 2020 was ending, did you guys notice how many people were like, yeah, 2020 is ending, woo, right? There's a similar sense of blaming the age, right? Blaming the year rather than placing the blame on any particular person. Because again, we could point a lot of fingers right now. There's a really long New Yorker article pointing fingers about COVID-19 and saying whose fault it all is. But in the end, it just feels like we just live in kind of a messed up time. And there's something sort of liberating about that. Once you accept that you live in a degenerate age, all of a sudden your expectations become drastically lower, right? It's like, well, we just live in a messed up time. The Mongols are taking over, everybody's getting sick. One thing that I'm trying to figure out is, are there pandemics happening in the 13th century? And I think there are, right? I don't know about in Japan, but in other parts of Asia, definitely. And it usually goes together with armies, right? Armies spread, diseases spread with them, people don't have food to eat. Bad times in the 13th century. And we could blame the Mongols, but the Buddhists like to blame the degenerate age that was coming. And so the argument becomes, we need a simplified teaching for this degenerate age because people are dying, because life is hard, because we don't have food to eat. We need to bring out these blessings. The best way to bring out these blessings is to recite the name of this scripture. And so that's what people did, a simplified teaching for the degenerate age. And eventually, Soka Gakkai is a more recent group, let's say in the last 100 years or so. People write books about them too. I don't know as much about recent developments in Soka Gakkai, but they've become a very active kind of missionary group, even in America. And so again, they're sort of spreading the teachings even today. So that's Nichiren in a very basic form. So have you ever see somebody kind of reciting Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, or if a Buddhist missionary ever knocks on your door and asks if you heard the good news about Nichiren, then you'll know who they are. It's going to be these guys. So any questions about this stuff? How's that sound? So the reason I wanted to start with this is because I think it helps us understand Pure Land as it develops in China and in Japan, because it's also situated in this idea of an easy path, a simplified teaching for a degenerate age. There was a similar sense of a degenerate age when Pure Land started to develop, and it really focuses on death. It might not be obvious at the outset, but what this helps people do is deal with death. And when you're surrounded by death, you kind of need tools to deal with it, right? And again, I apologize for being a downer, but it's the end of class. It's a perfect time to be talking about death. This book will actually talk a lot about death in hopefully enlightening and interesting ways. And as we started the class, you know, what does the Buddha see when he goes out and he sees the four sights? One of the things he sees is death, right? This is a major issue for Buddhists. And so it makes sense that they would constantly be thinking about it. So what is Pure Land talking about? Well, it's greater vehicle, like I said before. It's devotion to this particular Buddha, Amitabha, in Chinese, Amitofo, in Japanese, Amida Buddha. And he has this Pure Land, and this is where the name comes from, to the west. There's a sense it's out to the west somewhere. And I thought this is actually a pretty good image to illustrate what this means. We have this wheel of life, otherwise known as samsara, right? We zoomed in and talked about all the details of this. Remember that earlier on in the semester? You've got the humans and the gods and everything else, lots of suffering. You're moving around in circles. You have these animals in the middle. Do you remember what the animals symbolize? So these are the negative emotions that keep us trapped in samsara, right? Greed, hatred, ignorance. And so because of greed, hatred, and ignorance, we do bad stuff. That's this one, and we get reborn in bad places. But then because of Buddhism, we might do virtuous stuff and then be reborn in good places. But in the end, you're just stuck going around and around and around, and it sucks, right? And so the whole point of Buddhism is to get out of the cycle. Remember all this sort of stuff? It's kind of familiar, right? What we have not talked about is what's going on up here. I don't know if I ever even showed you this part of the map. But what's going on up here is there's this little wispy trail up here, and there's a red Buddha. Usually Amitabha is depicted as red. In Tibetan tradition, he's usually red, actually not always in East Asian traditions. And the Buddha over here is sort of pointing at him and basically saying, hey, you know, that's not a bad place to go either. And so there's a sense that this is another place you could be reborn. You don't have to be reborn in samsara. You could be reborn in this other place. So again, it's very much a way of thinking about death and what happens when we die. There is a philosophical background to it. We didn't talk too much about these bodies before, but these are actually pretty important Buddhist ideas. It's from Kyon. I kind of dug this up from a previous slide from the first part of the semester. We used the word emanation before. That showed up in the life story of the Buddha. And there's a sense that Buddhas can emanate onto this earth. It won't really be them, so to speak, but they can sort of send this projection. For example, maybe I'm doing something stupid and, I need a little guidance or something. A Buddha might emanate down and give me some advice and then disappear, something like that. So this is one form that a Buddha can take in Mahayana Buddhism, is this emanated form. Another form a Buddha can take is this enjoyment body. And one reason we didn't discuss this is because it's a bunch of big terms that we weren't discussing yet, but this is the enjoyment body. It's almost like a new category where rather than being in samsara, where there's all this suffering and impermanence and horrible, bad things always happening, Buddhas can create entire worlds. Because why not, right? Why not create an entire world? A world without suffering, a world where you can just kind of hang out and study Buddhism and have a good time. And so Amitabha took a vow, and he said, anybody who recites my name, right? Again, we've got name reciting. Anyone who recites my name can come join me in my Pure Land, right? In my, it can hang out, talk to me in my enjoyment body. It's not in samsara. It's also not full enlightenment either. He's basically creating this space to protect people, right? To give them kind of a refuge. And if you're thinking, I've heard of something like this before. Have you guys heard of something like this before? What does it sound like? I'll let you keep thinking about it if it doesn't come to mind immediately. So that's another option. Another thing that Buddhas do is, and we've talked about this a little bit before when we were reading the life story of the Buddha, is they become one with reality itself, right? We don't always see it this way, but this is another Buddhist idea when we can kind of, reduce things into emptiness. I gave you kind of a difficult question about that on the exam. There's a sense of what is behind that emptiness, and one answer is the Buddha, right? There's a sense that the Buddha is reality itself. And again, we touched on this before, and we can touch on it again. It shows that there are different Buddha bodies, and this is one way of expressing how people came to think about enlightenment, right? How does enlightenment exist? Well, in one way is it's this veiled emanation that comes into this earth, just like Siddhartha Gautama. We could call him an emanation body. There are these enjoyment bodies that are outside of samsara, and we can go to them after we die. Or there's the reality body that is the fundamental nature of reality itself. So again, these are kind of new ideas with the greater vehicle, right? And if I had emphasized this before the exam, you could have written about this on the exam, but I didn't. So none of you were able to do that. Here's an image of the Pure Land. And, it looks like a good time. You got the Buddha in the middle. You got all these people hanging out. You got flowers. You got water. It's very nice. It comes to be known as an easy path. Again, Amitabha has taken this vow. One way to think about it is other power. You're relying on the power of Amitabha in order to achieve enlightenment, as opposed to self-power. What do you think you have to do if you're doing the self-power route? If you're not relying on Amitabha to achieve enlightenment, how do you achieve enlightenment? Yourself. Yeah, exactly. So you have to rely more on your own efforts and on your own enlightenment, right? On things like Buddha nature and so forth. So this is the other power path. I have kind of a goofy video. You guys want to watch the goofy video? I guess we like videos in this class, right? Kind of breaks up the monotony. So why don't we watch a little video, then I'll give you a little discussion, and then we can go through the reading a bit. And then actually, let's see. I should stop 15 minutes early to go over the exam too. So maybe we won't do a breakout group today. We'll see. Let's watch the goofy video though. No, I'm being a little facetious because it's sort of a goofy video. It feels like a commercial, doesn't it? So what are they selling? What is the argument that's being presented here? Jonathan? Yeah. Yeah, it is like a shortcut, exactly. It's saying that, work smart and not hard, right? So like some Buddhists work really hard and they go on these arduous paths, but it doesn't have to be that way. There's an easier way. And again, the logic behind it is Amitabha. He's this Buddha in the middle of this Pure Land. He made a vow. We've talked about vows many times. He made a vow that anybody who recites my name can be reborn in my Pure Land. We just talked about what is a Pure Land. It's this very comfortable space. The enjoyment body of the Buddha is there, and we can join him there too. So it's this abode of the Buddha that is beyond suffering. So because he made this vow, we can rely on this vow and be reborn there. So I think in the interest of time, let's not do the breakout group, but I can just ask you, how does this compare to other things we've seen so far? How does this compare to, let's say, I don't know, the life story of the Buddha? Did the Buddha just recite? Well, let me use my terms a little more carefully. How does this compare to the life of Siddhartha? Did he recite the name of Amitabha and get reborn in the Pure Land? No. How is the life of Siddhartha different from this? Would you say that Siddhartha took the more difficult path? Yeah, it was more gradual, right? He took steps, he learned things, he made mistakes. Why would anybody want to do this? Doesn't it feel cheap? Doesn't it feel too easy? Less valuable? Why do you think this is appealing to people? Because what? I can do this one thing. I don't have to worry about Buddhism all the time. It's almost like you can just kind of live your life, and then at the very end of your life, say Namo Amitabha Buddha, and then you'll be good, right? And so there's room for abuse here, isn't there? Right? And I think as rational modern people, we can kind of poke holes in this tradition. And that's one reason I wanted to give that historical background. Now, let's suppose we're living in an age of degeneration, right? An age of difficulty, which again, we kind of are, right? We kind of are. What would this sort of practice do for you when people are dying all around you? And again, I hate to be morose, but I think that this is where this really comes from, in my humble opinion. We really need to see this within its context. What does this do for you at a funeral, for example? Let's say you're at somebody's bedside and they are saying Namo Amitabha Buddha, and I'm saying Namo Amitabha Buddha, and we're all evoking Namo Amitabha Buddha. How does that transform the moment of death? Yeah, we have a sense of where they're going, right? Because again, if we take a step back to other kinds of Buddhism, let's say, I'm a grumpy old man. I probably will be a grumpy old man. I'm already a grumpy young man, so why would anything change? Let's say I live a grumpy life. I'm mean to people, right? According to early Buddhism, what's going to happen to me after I die? If I've committed sins and done all sorts of bad stuff, where am I going? Probably not good places, right? We don't know necessarily, but probably not somewhere good. And how do Buddhists comfort each other? Where they're like, well, that's just kind of what happens, right? This is reality. That's how I presented Buddhism at the beginning of class, right? Earlier in this class. Death is sort of a bitter pill that we all must swallow. Would you agree with me? This really transforms the way we think about death, doesn't it? Here you can be confident that somebody's going to a better place. And, maybe I'm presenting this as sort of an opiate of the masses. Have you guys ever heard that phrase before? Who said that? Karl Marx, yeah, opiate of the masses. It's a powerful idea. That's his very succinct critique of religion. And this does feel a little bit like an opiate for the masses, doesn't it? Would you guys agree with me? Does this feel like an opiate for the masses? How is this like an opiate for the masses?
easy answer that solves a lot of problems in class. You just sit back and not worry about.
And I wonder, I'm not like a Marx scholar, so I don't really know what exactly he meant when he said that. But in a way, to me at least, this actually speaks to a function. Do we use opiates in medicine? Or should I call them opioids? Yeah, we do, right? What are opioids used for? Relieving pain, exactly. Does life sometimes have pain in it? Can religion give us tools to relieve that pain? It can, and I think this is actually not a bad thing, right? It's not always a bad thing. A lot of people use that phrase sort of disparagingly and say, oh, that's just an opiate for the masses, just throw it out, it's not really useful. I want the truth, damn it, right? And like an opiate, you don't want to use them too much, right? Of course, opium is sort of the original opiate, right? But then you get heroin and the pills that our doctors love to give us whenever we are willing to take them. The problem with it is you get addicted, right? You kind of can go off into this nice removed land where there is no suffering, and that's quite literally what opioids do for you, right? Is they take the pain away. They are painkillers, and so there is something kind of similar happening here. And I'm being a little dismissive of Pure Land because this is an important tradition in America now, right? When Buddhism came to America, people really embraced this, and one reason also is there are some parallels to Christianity. Was anybody thinking about that as we were watching that video? How is this similar to at least some Christian traditions and Christian ideas? There's a group called Jodo Shinshu. They have there's a church, a Jodo Shinshu church, a Pure Land church. It's in the Upper West Side. It's like near Columbia University. I've planned to go there, and then COVID happened. I didn't go, so I've still never been there myself. But though that group in particular, they really took kind of the formal congregation style approach to religion we could say is inspired by Christianity and really adapted it to Pure Land. So how can anybody draw these parallels? Maybe I'm pushing it a little bit too hard, but can anybody see parallels between Pure Land and Christianity? What would we call the Pure Land in Christianity? It's heaven, right? This place that is beyond suffering, up in a cloud where everybody's having a good time and nobody's suffering, right? That's a familiar idea, isn't it? And isn't this something that people talk about at funerals? Absolutely, right? And you could talk about it in terms of like punishment and reward and that sort of thing. Be a good boy or girl, you go to heaven. Be a bad boy or girl, you go to hell. That's definitely baked into this whole samsara thing. What was kind of disappointing about the samsara thing is there's no escape, right? There's no release, there's no relief. And the only way to get it is through all this hard meditation and this lifetime of austerity. It's, again, kind of a grim tradition in a lot of ways. And so when you have these moments of degeneration, let's say years like the year we've been having, it presents a problem for Buddhism because all these people are dying. You don't want them all to be going to hell, right? You don't want them all to be having this difficult round and round and around. You want to imagine something else, someplace else, right? And to me, that's really what Pure Land does for Buddhism. Okay, maybe that's enough of that. Questions about Pure Land so far? How's that sound? So the main practice, again, is reciting the name of the Buddha. For Nichiren is the name of the sutra. Now it's the name of this Buddha. Very similar sort of practice. If you ever see a monk in China, if you ever travel to China and you see a monk, a very common greeting is to say the name of this Buddha, Amitofo. Again, because it is such a common practice to recite the name of this Buddha. So what does this term mean? Nianfo or Nembutsu is the recitation of the Buddha's name. It's also bringing the Buddha to mind. It's kind of, it means both of these things. So, this is the complicated part of translating terms, and that's why I give you these terms, is because it's actually extremely difficult to translate. Very simply, one is saying the name of the Buddha, and one is thinking of the Buddha. And maybe you can imagine those are sort of related. maybe I'll ask you, how are those related? How is thinking of a Buddha and saying the Buddha's name related activities? Are those related activities?
Not a big difference between thinking and speaking.
Yeah, it's not a big difference between thinking and speaking. I like that. And one thing I tried to stress earlier in the class is you can act with your mind, right? You can make actions with your mind. And here's another example, is to very actively think about something. And if you are actively saying something, like Brendan is saying, you will probably be thinking also, right? And so this is, they're related, right? They're intertwined, and that's what this practice is. By reciting the name of the Buddha, you're also thinking of the Buddha. Why do you do this? Is to establish a connection with Amitabha, right? And to gain rebirth in the Pure Land. So by reciting the name of this Buddha, you are thinking of the Buddha, and he enters into your mind, right? That's the general thrust of this practice. We've seen something like this before. Maybe you remember deity yoga, right? You're establishing this connection with another deity like Tara. This is a little bit different because rather than becoming Amitabha, you're just trying to connect to Amitabha. Can you see the difference there? Right? So you're thinking of this other being and trying to develop a connection with the other being. But I would argue it's very similar to the tantric practices we saw before. It just stops short of becoming that other being, right? You're just drawing a connection to the being. And again, there's a sense that if you do this practice in the right way, Amitabha will appear directly before you. The reading was actually, it's a little bit long, it's a little bit dry, so we don't have to go over all the details. I'm not going to give you an exam on it, so I'll just kind of give you the basic pieces. There were really two different practices. One kind of comes before the other. I'm actually going to talk about the second one first because it's quite a bit simpler, and I think it hits the main points in a more clear way. You eat one meal a day, you remain standing or sitting up, there's no sleep, and you recite the name of the Buddha throughout the day and night. So just telling you this is actually a little bit like Ramadan, right? But even more extreme. What do you think is going to happen if this is your schedule for a whole week? Again, I'll say it again. One meal a day. So you're going to be like the guy I saw at the bodega, you know? You're going to be hungry. Have you guys ever fasted before? A little bit? Fasting will change the way you look at the world, right? It will make you loopier, for better or for worse. If you don't have a bunch of homework to do, maybe it can be kind of an amazing spiritual thing. But if you do have a bunch of homework to do, like many of your Muslim classmates, it will be difficult, right? And I'm sure some folks are going through that, maybe in this class as well. You need to remain standing or sitting up. Have you ever pulled an all-nighter before? What is day number 2 after an all-nighter like? Are you clear? Are you thinking clearly? Are things like spinning and moving all around you and stuff? Yeah, so that's baked into this too, is you're not sleeping, you're not lying down. Maybe you can sleep while you are sitting up, that almost certainly happens, but it's very easy to wake up, right? It's not going to be a deep sleep. It's going to be kind of a light sleep. Then you recite the name of the Buddha over and over and over again. So what do you think is going to happen if you do this for a week? You're not eating enough, you're not sleeping like at all, meditating, reciting, trying to imagine this Buddha. Do you think you might actually see the Buddha by the end of that week? Yeah, you're probably going to see the Buddha by the end of that week, right? And so this is an early version of this practice. Again, the reading, if I had the chance to edit this, I'd probably put this one first because I think it's the more clear of the two practices. But if you want to find kind of an interesting, reading correlate to it, it's only a couple pages. This is 377 to 379. And it's full of interesting stuff. This is the earlier of the two practices too. This is from the 7th century. So this is kind of we can just simply say the more original of the two. And as we discussed, you'll probably have these visionary experiences. You'll probably see some things. You'll probably talk to Amitabha Buddha for all we know, right? And so this is one way, again, to sort of develop this connection and say, okay, Amitabha, nice to meet you. I'm coming for you when it's time for me to die. And you can keep these visions with you, right? When it is finally time for you to die, you will similarly be confused. The things will be getting dark. Your body will be getting cold, right? And you can bring up these memories from the time when you had this crazy week. of like living in a cave and just saying Amitabha Buddha over and over again. Eventually, there is a little more ornate practice that gets tied up with this, where you just have to like have a single heart and a single will, and all you need is sort of a single or no, so 10 moments of mindful recitation. So you don't need to do the whole week. You don't have to have the deep visionary experience. Again, it's more accessible. You end up basically with what the video said, right? Is you just recite the name of the Buddha. And I would argue this is a very different sort of practice, right? It's a bit more, we could say, superficial, right? There's not as deep of a connection to Amitabha Buddha. And frankly, when it does come time to die, this would probably be a little less comforting. So if you're really curious about how to do this, I'd go with the OG one, but of course that one's a little harder to do. So that's basically it. We don't even have to worry about all this stuff because I want to go over the exam. But any questions about all of that? How's it all sound? Pure Land, Other Power, Degenerate Age. So I actually introduced a few important ideas for understanding Japanese tradition. And like we said before, next up will be Zen. So Zen kind of develops in contrast to a lot of what we talked about today. All right, so exam. There won't be any more exams, right? So just so we're totally clear, that was the second of 2 exams. And it's pretty similar numbers. So exam 1, just for comparison, I guess it's actually not that similar. It was about 3 points higher for exam 1. So a lot of the big A pluses, like a lot of people really aced the first exam, maybe because, I don't know, they took it more seriously. Maybe it was a little bit easier. I don't know what to say. A lot of people got really high A pluses or really high A's. This time, only 3 A pluses. So that's 98 to 100. More A minuses though. So there was sort of a shift. The A's weren't quite as high as they were in the first one. And what else happened? The B's are about the same. And there were a few more C's, D's, and F's, right? The C's, yeah, about the same, but more D's and F's. I guess I put the D's and F's here together. There were 4 people with D's and F's. Now we put them together, it's 8 people with D's and F's, right? So I hate to say it, but what that tells me is some people just sort of gave up. I mean, I don't want to point fingers, but like to get a D or an F on an open book, open note exam means you're just not paying attention, right? Because if you are paying attention, you have the notes, you can refer to the notes, you will get points, right? There's no way to not get points. And so, again, I hate to say it, but my heart was a little bit broken grading these exams because it's just very clear some people out there in TV land are not actually out there in TV land. More simply put, still lots of A's, right? If I just looked at this graph, I would say this exam was too easy. And so, usually you want the bell curve kind of in the middle. But because there were so many extreme F's, like some real, again, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but really crazy low F's, it brought the average down pretty low. As you can see, the mean was 5 points below the median. I don't know if you know about statistics, but that means somebody's really dragging that down. And so just compared to exam 1, pretty similar trends. A few more on the F side, a few less on the A side. So some people, maybe they're like, oh, I did really well in the first exam. I'm just not going to study for the second one. That's a bad idea. A little bit of studying goes a long way. So anyways, like I said, I was a little sad as I was grading this exam. It was also very clear that a lot of people cheated, which again, why? Like if you need to copy and paste from something, why not copy and paste from the books I have given you? Why must you copy and paste from a website? Why must you break your teacher's heart? I'm sounding like a sad old grandfather, but that's what I'm becoming. So very simple. We got 10 minutes, so I'll just go through this very quickly. Milarepa, right? So this is a story. Again, I like to begin with kind of an easy question, or what I think is going to be an easy question. We spent, the class before the exam talking about Milarepa. A little bit of attention being paid. You'd be able to pick up on this. And so Milarepa, evil karma, you had to be a little specific. Some people are like, his evil karma were the bad things he did in the past. It's like, okay, good job, way to restate the question. But, what is evil karma really talking about here is he murdered people, right? You had to get the murdering, killing his cousins. How did he overcome it? Some people said Marpa, that's good. That to me, that's like almost 100% there. But if you could, like building the towers, taking down the towers, right? We watched a whole video about that. And so Guru Yoga would also be fine. Pure perception would also be fine. Something about the practice. If you just said Marpa, I gave you partial credit, but to get full, you had to talk about the practice. This one was harder. This was a little bit of a curveball. It's basically, do you remember the Tathagata Sutra? Most of you could figure out yes. Some people added extra Sanskrit words to the title of the Tathagata Sutra, which made me think, oh, you must be really good at Sanskrit, or you looked it up on the internet, either one. So you maybe this will be advice for future exams. If you're going to cheat, don't give extra information that we didn't cover in class, because if you do that, you are revealing yourself as a cheater, right? And by the second question, if I see somebody's a cheater, again, makes me sad. So Tathagata Garba, and I guess, you know, just to kind of drive this point home, or no, that's the wrong one. It's this one. Have this open when you're taking the exam, right? Like, what book or story or sutra is this coming from? There's only so many. It's the Tathagata Garba Sutra, right? It's pretty easy to copy and paste from there. So anyways, what is this a symbol for? Some people wrote like the flowers went up into the sky, and you know, I read the Chinese Buddhism encyclopedia entry for this, and it, you know, people were copying directly from that. Some people were summarizing that. That's also fine. But what's the point, right? And this is the sort of the funny part. Is a lot of people could copy from online sources or from even the book I gave you. But what's the point, right? We talked about the forest and the trees. Wait, the forest and the trees, right? Remember that? You had to be able to kind of jump to the forest. If you only could see the trees, you're not really answering the question. So what is the point? The flowers wilt and become stinky, right? So you had to say something about the flowers wilting and becoming stinky. If you only wrote like the flowers went into the sky and shone all the lights, like that'd be fine. But that's missing the point of this sutra. What is the point of this sutra? What is the Tathagata Garba even talking about? It's saying we have enlightenment covered by a bunch of gross crap. Remember, we talk literally about finding gold in a cesspit, right, of human feces and all those sorts of disgusting things. So if you didn't get that the whole point of the sutra is to talk about enlightenment wrapped up in something gross, then you're not going to be able to answer this question, right? So you had to talk about the flowers getting wilted and stinky. What does it represent? Buddha nature. Okay, this one also a little bit difficult, middle way philosophy. Why did Buddha say that things, and I try to be very clear in my wording for this, that phenomena do not truly exist in the way that they appear to exist. Pretty open-ended. You could write about impermanence. That's not even really greater vehicle stuff, but it's also applicable here. Things don't appear to be impermanent. Things appear to be permanent, and yet they are impermanent, right? This is a very important realization for Buddhism. Other things, people talk about emptiness, a lack of inherent existence. That's a little bit rote, you know, you can just sort of copy and paste that and you're not really showing me you learned anything, but that's fine. I also accepted that. If you just wrote emptiness, I might have given you full points, but you had to explain a little bit what are you talking about, right? So that's basically what I was looking for is, could you explain some sort of plausible explanation for this? And why does it matter? This is even more open-ended. Anything plausible would have flown here. The best answers were, if we attach to things that are impermanent and pretend like they are permanent, we will inevitably suffer, right? Again, this is an important lesson for Buddhism, right? Buddhists care about suffering. They care about what causes us to suffer. If we don't see things as they are, we will suffer. I think there's some truth to that. And on the flip side, if we see how things do exist, how things come together to lead to phenomena and sort of cause them to arise, then there's a power that comes with that as well. And we can kind of manipulate those things. This one was about Nangnak. Some people called her a him, which was disturbing to me. There was some like Bangkok hotel website a lot of people copy and pasted from that also broke my heart a little bit. But yeah, what happened here? Nangnak died in childbirth, right? So pregnant women should not visit a ghost who died in childbirth. And that's sort of a Buddhist magic kind of logic here, but that it's very active in this tradition. What kinds of prayers? This one was a little harder. You have to know the story of Nangnak a little bit. But military conscription. Again, I think there was a good website for this, so most people got that right. The point at which the initial motivation Bodhisattva became, blah, blah, blah. This one, some people missed, is bodhicitta. And the reason I asked about this one is it showed up where we're talking about teachers, right? So for this third one, a lot of people could get it, is a teacher needs to care about the students. And so if a teacher doesn't care about other beings, they're not going to be a good teacher. And the middle one, some people miss this. This was very specific, is the vow, right? How do you develop bodhicitta? Is you take the vow. I talked about vows over and over again this semester. If you wrote something plausible here, I probably gave you partial credit. Some people wrote 6 perfections or something else, and it's like, okay, fine. But what I was really looking for here, the specific action, right? A vow is a specific action. The 6 perfections are not a specific action. So how do you develop this motivation? Is you fake it. You fake it till you make it. You say, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to take a vow to help all beings. I'm not really capable of doing it right now, but I will do it. I promise, right? And so you make this commitment. And so that is the specific action. This one, most people got. Tsilopa said it to Naropa, and pure perception or faith or trust. Most people got full points on this one. Basically just showing that Naropa would do anything his teacher taught him. Only a couple minutes, so I'll go fast. Sada Pravedita, why did he want to honor the teacher? He wanted to become his student. That's fine. The best answer said he wanted to learn the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. That's really what I had in mind when I wrote that question, but not enough people got it. So I gave full points for anything appropriate. So he wanted to be his student would be fine. How did they restore the flesh? Also kind of a hard question. You probably would have had to look this one up. Most people, maybe not most, but a lot of people did. And it's a moment of truth, right? Indra comes, takes his flesh, and Indra's like, okay, let me restore it for you. He's like, no, I'm going to restore this myself. And based on his commitment to the Dharma, right? By basically saying, I'm so devoted to learning the Dharma, may my flesh be restored. And that is what restored his flesh. It seems like a minor point, but it shows that even the Buddhists can bring out the blessings, right? You don't have to rely on the gods. This was Anne Gleig. Buddhist modernism, modern Buddhism. Some people wrote transnational Buddhism. I think that was tied up with this in the slide, which is fine. And I think on the page itself too, they talk about transnational. That's fine. Why rethink American-based convert Buddhism? This is the cultural baggage thing, right? When we say there's some sort of essential Buddhism, then everything that is not part of that meditation therapy style Buddhism becomes cultural baggage, and it all sort of gets thrown out, right? And these are a lot of the practices that Asian American communities hold valuable. And so Anne Gleig is bringing our attention to that. Torma is an offering cake. This is from the Tibetan Book of Spells. Some people wrote Buddhist magic. That would also be fine. What is the logic? I want to see you think about this a bit more, right? You're tying the string, you're pulling the disease, putting it in the cake, you're reifying the disease, you're destroying the cake, right? You need to go into it a little bit more. You're just saying it's a ritual, it's an exorcism, it's healing, maybe partial credit, but it wasn't going to be full credit. This one is deity yoga. Some people wrote tantric meditation. I think I gave partial for that. Visualization or evocation ritual. There are actually a few different names, but this is really deity yoga. Why is it deity yoga? Well, first of all, we have a yogin, right? We have someone who's doing this yoga, who's joining with this deity. The name of this practice is deity yoga. What is at least one goal? There are lots of different goals. There's the magic goals, there's the enlightenment goals, there's the merging with the deity goals. All of that would be fine. Mudras and mantras and spell recitations is how it's achieved. And then finally, we're a little over time, but I'll just do this very quickly. 2 kinds of meditation, a lot of calming, a lot of insight. Some people did guru, so some people did deity yoga. As long as you just told me what it is and gave an example, right? Cite specific examples. So some people might have lost points, maybe just 1 or 2 if you didn't have full examples. The greater vehicle, just what is the greater vehicle all about? Bodhisattva, 6 perfections, these different Buddha bodies we talked about today. Nobody talked about those, but Buddha nature, yeah, that was another thing that people talked about. And then finally, pure perception. Most people got full points on that one because we just spent so much time on it, but what is good about it, what's bad about it? Some people said Rita gross, so that was good. So that's the whole thing. Any questions about the exam? Okay, if you lost points and you don't know